Today's video is all about thinking about what really a chemical reaction is, and Huey's here to help out. So what we're actually going to be doing is I'd like for you to revisit the definition that you wrote about chemical reactions after this video is done, because I think that you might start to see things in a different way. Now, a chemical reaction, we know, has different signs like bubbling and fizzing, but a chemical reaction has so much more going on with it than we can actually even see. And that's when we have to turn on our chemistry goggles. Think about our chemistry goggles as just a different way for us to start to see things that are happening in a different way at that particle level. Because so much is going on in there. These substances are combining to form new substances. So what we have at the beginning of a chemical reaction is not necessarily what we are going to end up with at the end of a chemical reaction. And so I'm going to do two things in this video. Number one, I'm going to explain to you what a chemical equation is and how that can help us to visualize what's happening in a chemical reaction. And number two, you're going to see, in addition to what we understand about chemical formulas, a different thing that we can add in front of a chemical formula to help us to understand and make more sense of what's going on. So let's dive in and check it out. When we're thinking about what's actually happening in a chemical reaction, it's really important for us to be visual. And so we're going to go back to the idea of what does a chemical substance look like. So let's say that I had hydrogen gas, which its chemical formula is represented by H2. That would look something like this. You can see that I have two hydrogen atoms here. But what if I were to write the chemical formula, and this is something new, what if I were to write the chemical formula like this? How would that change this? Well, I've got a number down here that represents how many hydrogen atoms that there are. If I put a large number in front, that's going to start to represent how many of these I have. So right now I have one, and my chemical formula says that I need to have two. So let's add in another one. So now this chemical formula, 2H2, which is two hydrogen gas molecules. There are two hydrogen atoms here that make one molecule and two down here that make another, so that means that there are two hydrogen gas molecules. Now, I often get a lot of questions about how is water made. Well, water we know is H2O, but it has to go through a chemical reaction in order for this to actually happen. When this chemical reaction happens, two hydrogen molecules combine with one oxygen molecule. So let's take a look at how that looks visually. So now you can see here I have one molecule of oxygen, which is represented by O2, and there's two oxygen atoms that are combined down here to make one oxygen gas molecule. Now what we've actually got going on here is the start of something that we use as in chemistry called a chemical equation. A chemical equation is kind of like a math equation, and you'll see some similarities to a math equation as we go on here, but it helps us to see things visually. And so one of the characteristics of a chemical equation is that there separates the things that combine to react with a plus sign, which you can see right here. That's one of the rules of a chemical equation. Another rule of a chemical equation is that the two or three things that combine to actually make a reaction happen are called the reactants. And those are the things that are going to be on the left side of the equation. So if we know that there's a left side of the equation, there's going to be a right side of the equation, and that is actually separated by one thing. Now this is a little bit different than a math equation because we're not going to have an equal sign here. What we're going to have is we're going to have an arrow going to the right. And what the arrow going to the right means, it means yields. Or yields means produces in chemistry. So right now we're set up here with the reactants on the left separated by a plus sign, and we've got our arrow going to the right, which means yields or produces. And so those are the basic parts of a chemical equation, except that we're missing the part over here, and that's when we need to go back a step. We need to keep one big rule in mind when we're thinking about what is actually happening during a chemical reaction. What actually happens during a chemical reaction is that all of the atoms combine and they create new substances. So all of these atoms during this chemical reaction react and they move around and they try to start to form new substances. And this process is quite crazy, and it's hard for us to imagine it. But we start to and need to start to think about a couple of things. And my main biggest rule when we're thinking about what might be created in a chemical equation is that you should look to see if any of the products might be water. Can I make water? And since this equation is all about making water, that's where we need to figure out how we can pull these things over. So I know that I have my black dots were representing my hydrogens, and so I have 2 hydrogens and I need an oxygen to go with it. Let me add my symbols back on here. Now I've got 1 water molecule. Do I have enough left over here to make another one? Looks like I do. I've got an H, I've got another H, and I've got an oxygen. Let me move this over just a little bit here. Okay, so how many water molecules do I have? I have 2. 1, 2. So the other side of the chemical equation, or the right side of the chemical equation, is called the product side. And that is whatever is created in the chemical reaction, because we no longer have hydrogen gas and we no longer have oxygen gas. What we have is we have water in the liquid form. And so we know that water's chemical equation is H2O, but there's one thing that I need to add to this. I need to add a 2 in front because there were 2 water molecules that were created as a result of this reaction. So as a quick review, when we're thinking visually about chemical equations and what's actually happening during a chemical reaction, we have certain things that come together to create a reaction, and we call these things the reactants. And those are on the left side of a chemical equation. We show that they combine by putting a plus sign in between them. The things that are created, we know that it's created because we have a yields arrow going to the right. And we have also on the right side the things that were created in the chemical equation, which we call the products of the chemical equation. Reactants and products. The one other thing from this video that's very important to remember is how we write a chemical formula if we have more than one molecule that's reacting or that was created as a product. And we show that by putting a large number in front of it to show that there are 2 of those molecules represented in the chemical equation. And that whenever we're looking at a chemical reaction, we always want to see if we can first make water, because then we can go back to our substance table to look to see if there's other things that we can pull into it. So hopefully this walks you through the different steps of how we can visually see a chemical reaction up close, and we know that whatever we start with in a chemical reaction is not what we always end with.